This makes me feel right at home because I just came from a bit of a whirlwind of travel and left behind 5 children in Nova Scotia last night. So I'm flying out later today to go see them, and it's my mother's 70th birthday today. So I am looking forward to your questions, but I encourage you to ask them within the time frame of the next hour plus, and I'm looking forward to that. So thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. I'm really excited to share some of my work with you. And I also just really thank you for being here on this beautiful Saturday morning. And I share in your excitement and engagement about lifelong learning, and I appreciate you being here to share with that today. So I'm talking about kids in sport. I'm used to usually addressing parent audiences, coach audiences, sport programming audiences. I realize I've probably got a slightly newer audience today in terms of maybe a lot of grandparents in the room. So I hope that you take that in the lens of how you might communicate with your children about their sport, not always well received, but also how you may communicate with your grandchildren about sport. So without further ado, I'll start today. The title of my presentation is Kids in Sport, Laying the Foundation for Confidence, Character, and Success. So first, we need to think about this climate that we're living in today, and at risk of starting off in a very dire light, there is growing concern about the increasingly competitive job market out there. We have a huge segment of our educated young population who are unemployed or cannot find meaningful work. And with that, we've got increased concern about mental health and illness and that sort of thing. And this is all related to this very competitive climate that we're encountering. On the flip side of that, we see optimism and success defined in these ways that we never imagined, with young people doing incredible things. As this Maclean's article covered, they're smarter than boomers and way more ambitious than millennials. Brace yourself for the ultimate generation war. That's Generation Z, the ones coming through now. So it is a very interesting climate that we live in. But within this climate, there's this constant focus on success and how do we optimize our children's success. And again, myself as a parent, this question resonates constantly for me. One thing that we do know is that extracurricular activities have been consistently shown to be beneficial for children's development. And there have been a number of key seminal articles, Jacqueline Eccles' work and Bonnie Barber's work. This was a 1999 paper, Student Council, Volunteering, Basketball, or Marching Band. What kind of extracurricular involvement matters? And essentially, they found that all of these types of activities are very beneficial. They all sort of foster development in slightly different ways. More recently, Joseph Mahoney and Reed Larson have really focused on organized activities as context for development. So what do we do? How do we cater that environment? What do we do within the sport program, the marching band program, the high school musical program that really fosters optimal development, that brings out these characteristics of competence, character, success? One thing that we do know is that of all the extracurricular activities, sport is the most popular. So kids spend more time in organized sport than any other organized activity. Not necessarily any other activity. We all know they're spending most of their time here. But when we look at the organized activities, this is where they spend most of their time. So the benefits of organized sport. We regularly see, we're quite familiar with the physical benefits, but more and more we're focusing on those psychosocial benefits again. So a couple of recent news articles for kids, good things come in triathlons, talking about how this is gender mixed, and so there's less focus on the competition and more on the personal development. Athletes give back to youth, support youth. So examples of Silken Laumann, Brian Olsen, starting programs to help youngsters considered at risk. Sport lifts self-esteem in young people. And then, of course, active young, fit for life. Then we can also think of those incredible role models. I think most of us can remember to the 2014 Olympics in Sochi and just being captivated by the Dufour-Lapointe sisters, who finished in the moguls, finished gold, silver, and 12th place finish. And just obviously that being spectacular in itself, but the relationships and the love that these sisters seemed to have for each other and the support that they had for each other was just quite incredible. And we were all quite aware of that. Think of Alexandre Bellido, who was our first Olympic medal winner, gold medal winner in Vancouver. And he was inspired by his younger brother, Frédéric, who has cerebral palsy, and he raced for him. then we think, of course, of somebody like Sidney Crosby, who despite all of the fame and fortune and professionalism that goes with him, still maintains an incredible element of sportspersonship and humility. And finally, Clara Hughes, our own honorary doctorate here at York University, who's really opened up the doors and coming forward with her own mental health, struggles with mental health as an athlete, and opened up those conversations and really started to break down some of the stigmas associated with mental health. So we have these great role models, and we think this is how we define success. This is what we're aspiring to. This is what we want for our kids. And then unfortunately, we've got the flip side of that too. All too constantly, or maybe we're just becoming more and more aware of it. The examples of Lance Armstrong. I mean, he's the liar, he's the cheat, and he dragged everybody along in that miserable journey. And of course, all too prevalent in current media is our examples of spousal abuse, etc. And then not only in the element of role models, but then we also think about some of the concerns at the youth sport level. Today's children in overdrive. We're overscheduling them, that we're so obsessed with so much, so ambitious that they achieve this element of success that we've completely overstructured their lives in the pursuit of it. Casting kids aside, this idea that in our structure of high performance sport, working towards the peak of that pyramid, we're so quick to brush aside anybody who doesn't fit the mold of seeking high performance sport, and that there's no place for them unless they're looking to go to the highest levels. And then, of course, most recently, continued struggles and issues around mental health, concussion, illness. Is it all worth it? And we've seen in many cases of professional sport, injury, mental health, and even death by suicide. So what I'm going to do today, I think, is to address some of the key questions that we often ask ourselves around kids' sport. And I'm kind of making some assumptions as to what your key questions might be, but they're ones I regularly hear all the time. So just to go through those. First, what is the appropriate age to start sport? How many activities are optimal? Should we be concerned about aggression and questionable social norms in sport? How can we assure healthy development? Healthy competition? And how do we talk to children about tough losses, bad ref calls, or other complex sports situations? And finally, what should we look for in a youth sport program? So I'm going to draw the first couple of questions are going to focus mainly on some of the research that I've done, and then the last couple of questions I'm going to look more broadly at some other research other people have done. So I will spend a bit more time on those first three, but then we'll move into all of them. So did I hit any of the ones that you're interested in? Nods are good now. Good. Okay, so starting with what the appropriate age to start sport is. And this is an interesting question. Just to show of hands in the room. How many people did sport when they were kids? Did organized sport? Okay, at least half. Good. Now, I'm going to just start with an age, starting with 1. And if you think about when you started sport, I know it might be hard to think exactly, but approximately when you started sport. Throw your hand up when I get to that number. So how many started at 1? 2. Keep your hand up, sorry. 3. 4. 5. 6. 7. 8. 9. 10. 12 and later. 11. I missed 11 and later. Okay, so if you looked around the room while that was going on, then very few under 5 or 6. Most starting 7 and onwards, most actually in the 10, 11 onwards. So I think that speaks volumes, because if we look at what's going on in our sports fields right now, that's not what we're seeing at all. So maybe this is a true story. So a Dutch football team did sign an 18-month-old boy. This was a couple of years ago. Just first you need to see, hopefully I'll get the clip coming up, but you got to see why. So, nailed them all, no problem. So, was this a publicity stunt? So, yeah, the parents posted this to YouTube, and somebody picked up on it, and it went viral, and before you knew it, this kid was signed. So, absolutely, it was a publicity stunt, but it does just reinforce, once again, this idea of success and how much pressure and expectation we put on success from such a very young age. And so if we look around our own sports fields here in Toronto, we are seeing an increasingly growing trend of early sport participation. We don't actually have those stats. I've tried very hard to find them. We haven't been tracking start age of sport at a national level at all. But what we can see is, the growth of Tim Hortons sport programs, which start at age 3. And I'm perfectly guilty of enrolling my 3-year-olds in soccer program in my community. Another one that actually started in 18 months is this program. It's a franchise that started here in Toronto called Sport Ball, and it's gone international now. It's very, very popular as well. They started 18 months, and it's organized sport. And another thing that I have done to try and get a hold of these numbers is to be in contact with sport organizations and get their registration numbers. So if you think of something like Gymnastics Ontario, 45% of their registrants are under the age of 6. So we've got huge population segments engaging in organized sport. So in order to answer the question of, at what age should they start? And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to try and contextualize some of the things maybe that we should be thinking about in starting kids in organized sport programs. So I think it's first important to look at what the general objectives of children's sport are in terms of development. And the first one, these are widely accepted, the first one being physical health. So the idea that they engage in physical activity, and so of course they're going to be more healthy physically. The second, that they develop motor skills. And so by engaging in organized sport, they develop motor skills. With those motor skills, they'll be more likely to either be involved in sport at a lifelong level, or at least have the foundations to be involved in physical activity recreationally throughout their life, or maybe flip back and forth between the two of those. And then finally, this idea of psychosocial development and life skills, and this is where my interest really lies. This idea of leadership and confidence and competence, character. Those are things that we all assume happen through kids' sports programs. So I know this is a big, busy slide. I am going to revisit it a couple times throughout the presentation. So I'll just take a couple minutes to point out a couple things that I want you to think about in sharing this slide. This is a model that was first developed in 1999. It's called the Developmental Model of Sport Participation, first developed by my former doctoral supervisor, but it has gained international attention now as a model and a framework to understand children's sport participation. It started by just looking at talented and elite athletes, but now you can see there's 3 main trajectories. There's this one in gray that's a recreational path. Children stay involved in sport at a recreational level. The middle one, the turquoise one, is a sampling or starting with recreation but moving into investment towards high investment sport or elite sport. And then the third path in black is an early specialization path. Black isn't really supposed to reflect what I feel about this path. Dark and, but it's, the idea of this early specialization being potentially a dark path, and that this might not be optimal for children's development. And so that path is a third one that we're thinking of. So what I want you to note is the green. First of all, the green on the bottom left. Despite or regardless of whatever the path, each one of these trajectories is proposed to start at approximately age 6. And then the second thing I want you to notice, you're probably seeing arrows about play and practice and what's that all about. So the first path is proposed to be about a lot of deliberate play. The second one, an increasing amount of deliberate practice. And the third path, primarily deliberate practice. What does that mean? Some of you may be familiar with the term deliberate practice. Malcolm Gladwell really popularized it recently in his book, The Outliers, by talking about this idea. It's Erickson and colleagues' theory of deliberate practice. And the idea is that anybody who engages in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, that's the amount of time required to reach an expert level in any domain, including sport. So this has been widely popularized. So what exactly is deliberate practice? Well, it's practice that's highly structured. It's got the goal of improving performance. It's highly effortful. And there aren't necessarily any immediate rewards. There are rewards down the way, but not necessarily in the moment, not necessarily enjoying what you're doing right this second in that highly structured environment. So again, the flip side of this, or a contrary concept that's been proposed, again proposed by Jean Coté at Queen's University, is this idea of deliberate play. And this is the idea that has proposed specifically in sports settings, that play is informal, that you can use modified, so it may happen in a backyard, out on the street, in a driveway, in a park. Generally, kids use modified equipment and often may modify the rules of the game to best suit their needs as well. Typically, it's intrinsically motivated. The kids go out and decide themselves, this is what I want to do, let's go pick up some hockey sticks. And finally, it's enjoyable, it's immediately gratifying. They're enjoying themselves in that moment. So going back to this model, again, you can see how the recreational path is focused on a high amount of deliberate play and a low amount of deliberate practice. The middle path has a sort of reciprocal relationship between play and practice with an increasing amount of deliberate practice as children move to higher levels of development. And then the early specialization path is primarily this high investment deliberate practice. A second framework I want you to think about when we think about the starting age for kids in sport is the long-term athlete development model. Again, some of you may have heard of this before. It's the framework that our national sport organizations are currently embracing to serve as a guiding framework for all our sport programming in Canada. And it's been adopted in several other countries as well. And it's based on extensive research, including some of Cote's work, but research in a whole bunch of different fields. So here you can see this model proposes essentially two different paths. On the left, you can see in purple the competition for life, and then sort of in the right and center, you see the active for life or fit for life path. And that second path, and it's proposed that people can sort of move between those two paths at any point in time. But you can see at the base of the model are three starting points or foundational levels. The first one being active start, the second being fundamentals, and the third learn to train. So active start is this 0 to 6. What's going on from 0 to 6? So again, we're thinking about that early start into sport. Well, what this model proposes is first that there's a focus on physical literacy. And this is the idea of children being engaged, knowing their body, being aware of their movements, and enjoying their physical activity. The second thing that's really important in the Active for Life start is the ABCs of movement: agility, balance, coordination, and speed. So a real focus on those fundamental things, again, that we look for as we start to develop young children. The interesting thing is the model doesn't even address the issue of organized sport. So you could interpret that one way as saying, okay, well, by not addressing it, it's clearly not important from 0 to 6. It's just about physical literacy and ABCs. But by the same token, the mere inclusion of that active start within this national sport organization's mandate and model is sort of a suggestion that maybe there is something that needs to be going on during that phase. So again, I think that we need to modify this model and continue to think about how it should really look. But I find it very interesting that the issue of addressing organized sport isn't even touched in this model. One of the only policy documents that deliberately or directly makes a connection or recommendation between organized sport during the preschooler years was put forward by the American Academy of Pediatrics in 1992. Nothing since then. So this is 23 years old. Readiness to participate in organized sport should be determined individually based on the child's, not the parent's, eagerness to participate, and subsequently enjoyment of the activity. Children are unlikely to be ready before the age of 6. So now I've presented sort of Cote, age 6, long-term athlete development, not really addressing the issue, Academy of Pediatrics, dead on, please not before 6, but that's 23 years old and they haven't revisited it. So moving into all of this sort of the increasing trend of early sport participation coupled with the idea that we're not really sure of the developmental outcomes of early sport participation has led us to think, I think it's time to study this. So we just have. This is a study that was, it's actually in press right now. It's entitled Tykes and Timbits, A Critical Examination of Organized Sport Programs for Preschoolers. And so I'll warn you now, it is very exploratory. Our goal was primarily to understand the objectives and outcomes of preschooler sport. And yeah, I'm sort of giving you the punchline, but I don't have a magic number at the end of this. So the participants for the study were 19 parents of preschoolers, 8 directors of childcare programs, and 57 preschoolers aged 2 to 5. So you're thinking, how did you research preschoolers aged 2 to 5? It was really fun. We did interviews at 2 time points with the parents and the childcare providers, 1 year apart, so we could really capture a progression with these kids as well. And then with the actual preschoolers, we went in and did focus groups in the childcare centers, usually 2 to 4 kids in a group. 2 and 3 worked better than 4. But we used drawing as well to help facilitate these conversations. So we got them to talk about play and to talk about sport and did they know what sport was. And they drew pictures for us as they went. And this really helped the conversation as well. So we got a lot of rich data out of this. Like I say, didn't come to any conclusive decisions about what age we should start, but just bear with me as we move through some of the results that I think really reflect on some interesting things we should be thinking about. So let's first revisit those objectives of children's health, or children's sport. Like I said, physical health, motor skills, and psychosocial development and life skills. And interestingly, what our findings came to show very quickly was that parents, child care providers, even kids, spoke directly to these three things. We have evidence of these being beneficial at the later childhood and adolescent stage. We have no evidence of this at the preschooler age at this point. So that's what we were trying to better understand. So starting with physical health. Immediately, of course, parents, child care providers, kids, they all spoke about, yeah, I do sport because it's healthy, it makes me healthy, it makes me active, it's strong, it makes me strong. When I probed a little bit deeper on that, then most of the time they were actually talking about physical activity. They weren't talking about organized sport. They talked about going to the park, they talked about riding their bike, they talked about various things. They weren't, when I asked them specifically about organized sport, they didn't necessarily talk about their health right away. In fact, they rarely did. One of the reasons I think for this is because they weren't actually that active in their sport programs. There's a lot of standing in line, there's a lot of listening to instructions, there's a lot of organizing and managing chaos. So parents, child care providers all brought that up, and kids too. And then they didn't necessarily enjoy them that much either. What really struck me is things that are almost innate to many children. Running, exactly, running. So it's innate, they love it, they just do it naturally. And yet, when you put them in an organized sport program and ask them to run, it's no longer enjoyable. I don't like it when Mr. Ripley says I have to run around because I get tired, sometimes I need to walk. So our conclusion was, well, that's the objective, and is clearly an objective of preschooler sport. The outcome is not necessarily always there. And I think despite this disconnect, when we think about it, between that objective and that outcome in terms of health, I think this quote speaks a little bit to why parents are putting their kids in sport, if you just want to take a moment to read through that. So there was this idea that organized sport is somehow better than going to the park. I might as well go and get something out of it. I only have an hour with them, so let's put them in an organized sport program, help them develop their motor skills. So looking at the second objective now, motor skills. Again, we saw this regularly, the idea brought up of sport, physical literacy, the ABCs of movement. In their sport program, they're climbing, they're jumping, they're doing somersaults, they're skipping, they're galloping. I don't know if I would necessarily be able to teach them all those things, say some of the parents. But then when we probed a little bit deeper, it wasn't necessarily always an outcome. They talked about, oh, that excessive feedback, my child doesn't respond well to that, or the idea of the structure and how rigid it is, and they're not having the opportunity to explore climbing, jumping, they're just being told to do it. So two quotes here. This was from a mother of a former professional dancer. Now you may argue, is dance a sport, is it not? For the purpose of this study, we included it as a sport because we were looking at organized physical activity programs. I have a real problem with 3-year-olds in ballet. So much research shows that the more codified movement that they have at the young age, the less creative they are. We're just knocking the creativity right out of them. Another mother, if you're always correcting her and telling her she did something wrong, she won't do it again. She'll shut down if she feels pushed and feels wrong. So this idea that organized programs may actually be pushing them away. So the one they talked about most extensively was the idea of not necessarily interpersonal skills, but that third objective, the, the psychosocial development, the life skills. So one of the things specifically they talked about were interpersonal skills. So again, we have this objective of sport offering these opportunities for skill development. And if you just want to read this quote, I think this mother really speaks to so much of what we hope sport will capture for young children and what they'll get out of it. So we are asking them to do so much, and I guess we're just kind of assuming that that's going to happen. But again, what came out when we probed a little bit further is that parents, coaches, everybody really needed to play an active role in making this happen. And again, that didn't necessarily happen. One parent did give a good example of how she assured it with her son when he would get really frustrated. She'd take him off to the side and help him do this strategy of taking some deep breaths and calming down. Another parent gave an example of how this went completely unaddressed when there was a real teachable moment and all the kids in the entire lineup had shook hands with the other team and said, bad game, bad game, bad game, and nobody said anything. Nobody turned it into a teachable moment. So there was that lost opportunity, and again, can't assume these interpersonal skills are happening with these 3-year-olds. So who best to teach these interpersonal skills? This was an interesting quote, I thought, from one of the parents that really raised the issue of how well-equipped the coaches, the parents, particularly the coaches, might be in trying to provide, be the teachers of these interpersonal skills. So this was a parent keeping in mind that every single child in this study was enrolled in childcare. So take a read of this. It's long, sorry. So daycare teachers are equipped to teach interpersonal skills. We're all putting our kids in sport so they can learn interpersonal skills by the coaches who are overwhelmed and by the young lifeguards who love to get them riled up. Obviously not always the case, but certainly I'm sure everybody in this room can think of a time when they saw that happening. Another element of this psychosocial or life skill development is competence and confidence. So obviously, we like to think that sport is a context for accomplishment, that we can achieve in this context. And I think the kids' words spoke most prevalently or clearly to this, when they talked about their favorite part is swimming by myself with my tummy down, running so fast, doing a handstand without a teacher. All of these things, they got so excited by their accomplishments. And you could see the enjoyment and the confidence and the competence, the interrelationship between those three. Of course, we can't overlook the flip side of that. It was also very much a context for negative experiences. Sometimes soccer's not fun. I got kicked with the soccer ball in the face. He thought it was funny. They don't cheer. I go on sports, but I don't know sports. So clearly, there are many kids out there who are very lost. And who are not enjoying these experiences at all. And does that contribute to decreased sense of competence? Does that contribute to decreased enjoyment and decreased confidence? And a third one that parents, childcare providers brought up, particularly parents, was I put my kid in sports because I want them to learn about being a team player. Again, it sounds like an interesting way, a good context for kids to learn about cooperative play. To learn to work as a team, to commit to their team, to become aware of their strengths and weaknesses within the team. If we think back to Parton's theory of play, preschoolers just lack the advanced communication and organized skills required to really engage in cooperative play. They don't understand how these pieces all fit together. My favorite thing is helping the other team. We steal the ball from all the different kids. We steal it. So cooperative is not quite in their vocabulary. Not only is it not in their vocabulary, but it's not in their understanding, their conceptual cognitive understanding at this point. Rarely, occasionally it is, and we did see some examples among the 5- and 6-year-olds, but certainly among the younger preschoolers, this was very prevalent. So if we think back, it seems that our objectives of preschooler sport align very closely with those same objectives that we have for children's sport, for adolescent sport, but that we're not necessarily seeing the outcomes at this point in time. So how does this relate back to what age should we start? Well, as always with research, we seem to have more questions than answers. What's the optimal balance between unstructured physical activity and organized sport among preschoolers? How should parents be navigating that, grandparents be navigating that? How much push when they don't like going to sport? Should you be pushing them to go to sport? What's the balance? Are we supposed to be bribing them or are we not supposed to be bribing them? Parents constantly talked about this struggle, the push that they encountered and the pushback, and should they wait another year? Should they take them out halfway through? But until these questions are answered, I think two things we need to consider. First, better public messaging around physical activity and sport, because what we really found was that organized sport seemed to be replacing the unstructured physical activity that might otherwise exist in these children's lives. And so if it's one or the other, is that the way we're supposed to be approaching it? Can we take an integrated approach, or should we be focusing strictly on the unstructured at this stage of their development? And then if we are going to enroll children in these organized sport programs, we really need to hold these programs accountable to a higher standard. Our coaches aren't trained. There are many issues with this. We've got first experiences. So if we're going to run these programs, let's make sure that we're really putting some time and investment into making sure that they are optimizing children's development. So that was the first question. I won't spend that much time on all the questions. I was just excited because it was a new paper. The second question is how many activities are optimal? So again, this question, I've got this constant concern about have I overscheduled them or should I be putting them in more activities? And I think this is a constant concern for many parents who are concerned about their children's success, balancing and rushing off to all the diverse activities in the hope of developing a well-rounded child who has a diversity of skills. Or then there's another thought process that's let's invest all our eggs in one basket so we can assure their success in hockey, in gymnastics, in whatever the activity might be, so that we make sure that they learn about focus and deliberate practice and work ethic and continue on in that one domain. And then maybe there's just this question of, are we completely overscheduling them, and should we be rethinking the way we're putting them in extracurricular activities? So again, I'm going to revisit this model, the developmental model of sport participation, because it did sort of serve as the entire framework for my doctoral research. So I tried to answer in my doctoral research this question of how many activities should we put our kids in, and some other questions in relation to that. One of them being, essentially what I was doing is comparing the second path, the turquoise path, and the last path, the elite path to the early specialization path to elite sport development. And I was looking at these two paths, which both essentially lead to some of the same outcomes, particularly in relation to sport. But maybe is one better than the other in terms of psychosocial development? Maybe is one potentially more related to dropout, withdrawal from sport? And obviously that is a concern. So you can see there's some numbers thrown into these two paths, 2 to 3 sports, only one sport from an early age. That's essentially what I was trying to tap into in combination with these ideas of deliberate play and deliberate practice. So my doctoral research, this is one paper that emerged from it. It was entitled Examining Adolescent Dropout and Prolonged Engagement from a Developmental Perspective. It was in the Applied Journal of Sports Psychology in 2008. And the purpose was to examine how sport training patterns throughout development may contribute to dropout and prolonged engagement in high investment youth sport. So the participants for this were 25. I chose to focus on competitive swimming. One reason is just because it is an individual sport, and that does narrow a whole lot of other variables that we need to play with. So, and because I came from a background of competitive swimming myself, so there was a personal interest there. But my participants were 25 engaged and 25 dropout competitive swimmers between the ages of 14 and 17. They were all high investment athletes, so they all were engaged a minimum of 10 hours a week during their adolescent years. And then they were matched on these key demographic variables. So this was a key point. Like I said, we tried to control for as many variables as we could, but they were matched on their age, on their gender, socioeconomic status, those sorts of things. So what we did is we basically tried to trace their whole developmental history, what they'd been involved in terms of sport, in terms of activities starting when they were very young, moving right up to their current age. And so these interviews, we had a structured procedure, and we basically spent 1 to 2 hours with each participant filling in charts and tables and that sort of thing. So this is what we found. First, in terms of swim training and competition throughout development, you can see the two groups were very closely matched. So this is the total mean hours per year. I should have had that on the slide, sorry. But the numbers in the column are the average hours per year that they spent in these different types of activities. Oh yeah, it's in the left side there. And you can see the two groups were very, very closely matched. And I did look at this through each stage of development too, but in the interest of space and busyness of the slide, I just put the average throughout development. So practice hours per year, the dropouts 353, the engaged 349. So closely matched, incredible. They spent about the same amount of time in competition as well. They spent about the same amount of time in dry land training as well. You can see it's a little bit less for the engaged, but it wasn't significantly different. The reason I want to focus on dry land hours of training is this is typically considered, the monotony of swimming. This is the deliberate practice. It's hard to measure what exactly in a swim practice when they're swimming lengths is deliberate practice and what's play and what's, skill development. But dry land, that's with the goal of improving performance. So we just use that as one measure of deliberate practice. Then where things started to get interesting was when we looked at the swim training and performance milestones. And here's where we started to see some differences. So again, we saw the dropout group did start a little bit earlier on average than the engaged group, did start competitive swimming a little bit earlier. But again, it wasn't significantly different. Where we did see differences was their start age in dry land training, with the dropout group starting a year and a half earlier than the engaged group. Their start age in training camps. Again, these are like March break, Christmas training camps, where they are in the pool 4 or 5 hours a day. So this is, again, a very clear measure of deliberate practice training. They probably would rather be somewhere else on those days. And again, you can see almost 2 years earlier, it started among the dropout group. And then finally, you can see this milestone we used. At what age did you become the best in your best event for your event? At what age did that happen? And you can see this happened about a year earlier for the dropout group. So what we're seeing here is a general trend of early specialization among the dropout group. So if we think again of those 3 columns, this column on the far right seems to be associated with more dropout than the turquoise path in the middle, based on these findings so far. Then here's getting to the number of activities. How many activities should I put my child in? So again, this was interesting. We found the number of other activities other than competitive swimming. Doesn't look like a big difference, but it was significant. So the dropout group were involved in fewer activities throughout development than the engaged group. So which again is an indication that they were probably specializing earlier. The idea of this deliberate play. So we asked them about swimming at the cottage, swimming at the pool, playing in the water. Asked them about that type of stuff. Huge difference between the 2 groups. The dropouts stopped playing very early, 29 hours per year throughout up to age 12, whereas the engaged 63 hours per year. So a real difference in terms of how they played in their sport. They lost that sense of play. So essentially what this shows is that this dropout group had a pattern towards early specialization, and the engaged group, if we wanted to use that as a measure of success, again, they continued on, whether just as a measure of sport success or more generally success, perseverance, those sorts of things, they had a pattern of more diversified sport involvement and more play in their sport involvement. They were involved in a greater number of other activities from an earlier age, a fewer number of dry land training and training camps from an earlier age, and more play. So again, this speaks to that question, how many activities, what type of training should they be doing? So this is I find, okay, well that's your competitive swimmers in one context, in one environment. This is a clip. I'm going to take a couple minutes to show it. I find it really resonates and brings home these findings and presents them and portrays them in a very clear way that we can all relate to.
ถ้าพูดถึงทีมฟุตบอลของเราคงต้องย้อนกลับไปที่วันแรกที่นี่ชาวบ้านชอบดูฟุตบอลกันมากแต่ไม่มีใครเคยเล่นหรอกก็อย่างที่เห็นเรากินนอนอยู่บนน้ำมาแต่ไหนแต่ไรแล้วเพราะที่นี่ไม่มีพื้นดินสักนิดกีฬาอย่างเดียวที่เล่นกันได้คือแข่งเรือไม่ก็โม้กันเรื่องปลาที่จับได้วันนั้นแหละความคิดเล็กๆก็เกิดขึ้นพวกเราคิดตั้งทีมฟุตบอลขึ้นมาแต่ชาวบ้านก็คิดว่าพวกเราบ้า
เด็กพวกนี้ส่งเสียงอะไรกันปาเปิ้ลหีหมดแล้วเราตั้งทีมบอลเราจะเป็นแชมป์โลกมีแต่ทะเลกันพี่กับทีมตกหมึก
อย่างที่แกพูดพวกเราไม่มีแม้แต่ที่ให้เล่นฟุตบอลพอเราจัดทีมกันเสร็จปัญหาต่อมาก็คือเราจะเตะกันที่ไหนล่ะที่นี่มีแต่ทางเดินแคบๆแล้วเราก็มีความคิดว่าเราต้องสร้างพื้นที่ของเราเองเรารวบรวมเศษไม้เก่าๆถูกเข้ากับแพปลาทำอย่างนี้ทุกวันหลังเลิกเรียนแล้วเรา เราก็สร้างสนามของเราขึ้นมามันโยกเยกแต่มีหัวตะปูเต็มไปหมดบอลตกน้ำบ่อยมากเลยพวกเราด้วยแต่เราก็เรียนรู้ในการเล่นบนสนามแบบนี้ก็นี่แหละสนามของเรา
สนามนี้อาจจะเป็นแชมป์โลก
แล้ววันหนึ่งเราก็ได้ไปสมัครการแข่งขันฟุตบอลไม่รู้ดิแล้วเราจะสู้กับเขาไหวเหรอแล้วเราก็ตัดสินใจลงแข่งถึงจะไม่มีชุดก็เหอะ
นี่เลยแชมป์ชุดนี้รออย่างแรง
เราไม่รู้มาก่อนว่าจริงๆแล้วชาวบ้านก็สนใจเราเหมือนกันพวกเขาเอาชุดมาให้แถมตามมาเชียร์ด้วยตอนนั้นเราตื่นเต้นนะแต่พอเอาเข้าจริงเราทำได้ดีกว่าที่คาดไว้จังหวะเท้าของเราดีกว่าจากการเลี้ยงหลบตะปูแถมประตูในสนามจริงใหญ่กว่าตั้งเยอะแล้วเราก็เข้าถึงรอบ4 ทีมสุดท้ายวันนั้นฝนตกหนักมากแถมคู่แข่งก็เป็นแชมป์เก่ารองเท้าของเราเต็มไปด้วยน้ำเราเล่นกันไม่ได้เลยหมดครึ่งแรกเราโดนนำไป2 ลูกเราสู้ไม่ได้จริงๆเราไม่รู้จะทำยังไงหลังจากครึ่งแรกที่เราสู้ไม่ได้เราต้องทำอะไรบางอย่างเราต้องกลับไปเล่นฟุตบอลแบบของเราด้วยการถอดรองเท้ามันเป็นฟุตบอลแบบที่เราถนัดจริงๆคู่แข่งสู้เราไม่ได้เราเล่นดีขึ้นทำได้ดีขึ้นเราตีเสมอได้เราคิดว่าเราจะชนะแต่เพราะลูกนั้นในนาทีสุดท้ายนั่นแหละเราไม่เสียใจหรอกดีใจซะอีกที่มาได้ไกลขนาดนี้แถมชาวบ้านทุกคนก็ภูมิใจด้วยหลังจากนั้นความคิดของคนทั้งเกาะก็เปลี่ยนไปวันนี้เรามีสนามใหม่ที่ไม่มีตะปูแล้วแต่เราก็ยังไม่ได้เล่นบนสนามหญ้าอยู่ดี
แล้วเรื่องของคุณล่ะTMB เชื่อว่าพลังในตัวคุณเปลี่ยนโลกให้ดีขึ้น TMB Make
So again, a cute story, but a true story, and really highlights many of those elements of deliberate play that we spoke about, and modified rules, equipment, enjoyment, all of it. Another example, of course, Wayne Gretzky. I know for myself, when the hockey season was over, I couldn't wait to play baseball. I had no interest in playing ice hockey until September. Now we've shifted this. If we think about being diversified, we think, oh, Wayne Gretzky was diversified. But instead of being diversified by seasons, then we're diversified all year long. So we've got everybody doing so many activities all year long as opposed to taking a seasonal shift and moving into something else that they enjoy. Third question, should we be concerned about aggression and questionable social norms in sport? I don't know, this probably speaks volumes for itself. Show another very brief clip here. Many of you have probably seen it, but I think it really speaks to.
Mom, are you gonna let her get away with that?
It's just a shopping cart.
So it's your shopping cart. What's wrong with you? You chicken?
But
Mom, you're such a wimp.
what?
What's wrong with you? Stand up for yourself. Go over there and give her a good smack. Oh, fight, 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 fight. She's a goon. Give her a taste of her own medicine.
So clearly the behaviors that we engage in some youth sport contexts are completely inappropriate in any other contexts. So I think maybe this question answers itself. When we think about, there is some research that shows that contact sports and even some elite athletes have been found to be associated with lower legitimacy judgments and moral reasoning, higher aggression, and that there's this association of typologies of violent and harasser. So this is just a couple of studies that I've highlighted here. There's not been a lot of research that's been done on it, but there is some evidence of a trend there. When we think about hockey, I don't want to pick on hockey, but we can't help think about hockey because we're in Canada and because of so many of the stories that have emerged in the media recently. So we think of the hockey norms entrenched in our Canadian culture. Parents' aggressive discourses have been very naturalized. Youth players learn aggressive tactics from the NHL. There's been studies that children pick up moves that they see on TV and implement them themselves. And there is one study that has shown that body checking is associated with aggression. I know most of you have probably heard more than you want to hear about body checking in the minor hockey leagues over the last couple of years because it's been very prevalent in the media. But very few have actually they've all looked at injury. We've focused all of this on injury. Nothing's looked at body checking and any psychosocial development that may be associated with it. So just to take you through sort of body checking in hockey in Canada as a case study for this question, because we recently published a study in this area. Body checking is considered a major risk factor for injuries. We know that. 46% of injuries in the minor hockey season are attributed to body checking, 3 times the injury rate in body checking leagues and non-body checking leagues. But in May of 2013, many of you may remember this landmark decision happened out of Hockey Canada that increased the minimum age of body checking from Pee-wee, age 11, up to Bantam, age 13. So that was a big move. It had been pushed for years, and some people said it was never going to happen, and then out of this meeting it emerged. Right at the same time, actually, it was very interesting. This paper was submitted for publication at that time when this decision was made, so it really made the study all that more prevalent. But we had a study we put out. I like that you hit a guy and not really get in trouble. Young ice hockey players' experiences with body checking. Well, the title kind of gives away what our findings were, but I'll just take you through it a little bit further in terms of what some of the results were that we found. So generally, our purpose was to gain understanding of young hockey players' initial experiences with body checking. So at the time we collected data, initial experiences meant age 11. And we wanted to look at it through this psychosocial lens as opposed to just through the physical injuries. So our participants for this were 34 male hockey players. They were Pee-wee players, age 11 to 12. We had a wide diversity of levels, right from the double B up to the AAA teams, wide diversity of positions, and also from different leagues around Southern Ontario. So what we did is we did 2 interviews with them, one at the start of the season and one at the end of the season, so we could sort of trace that development or change that may be happening over the season as they were introduced to body checking. And like I say, I want to emphasize this was in 2011 prior to the rule change. And these interviews were typically about 15 to 45 minutes conducted with these boys. So these were the 4 key results that emerged from the study, but I just want to focus on that second one today in the interest of time, this idea of aggression, power, invincibility, and fear. So here, first this idea of hockey as a legitimate context for aggression. So you had someone like Noah, these are all pseudonyms, but Noah says, I like that you can hit a guy and not really get in trouble, the title of our paper. Just like the feeling of hitting someone, like you just hit a guy. You can't really do that anywhere else. So it's kind of cool, you can do it in hockey. And then of course the rush, the thrill, the excitement that came with that. If somebody checks a guy really hard in a way that it can get pretty exciting, like nice hit, whatever, it gives you some momentum. I kind of like hitting players. I don't know. It's just kind of fun, I guess. So clearly they were enjoying this experience. Why were they enjoying it? Maybe this element of power. When you knock the kid down, you just feel good. You think, I'm stronger than you, haha. It's just another way to intimidate the other team. I've only been injured once, but it wasn't that bad, so I feel safe. I love going in the corners, not scared at all. Invincibility. But there was a flip side to this. You also had players talking about their fears and their anxieties. So let's say you actually do get hurt. Then you feel like down and you're kind of embarrassed, and so you don't want it to happen again, so you play it safe when you're supposed to be tough out there. So again, you can see the cycle of how the psychosocial really plays in. One factor affects the next. Now there's fear, there's anxiety. Now I'm not living up to what I'm supposed to do. Now I'm not enjoying myself anymore. I'll get scared sometimes when there's a big person. If I get hit by him, I just don't want to break anything. So those were some of the themes that we looked at in terms of aggression, power, and invincibility. I don't have time to really go into the coaches and the parents' influences, but just to say so much as the coaches typically did not play any role, again, keeping in mind this was prior to the policy change, did not play any role in teaching safe body checking. They did do a little bit of teaching on receiving a body check, but these kids talked about, they were introduced, we get to do it now, but now we do it. That's it. We're not really taught. We're expected to know how to do it. And parents' roles, again, it seemed to work on two sides. You had parents who would encourage their kids to use their body, be physical, be tough out there, and then you had other parents who were watching the NHL with their child and turned it into a teachable moment. Take a look at how he did that. That was a nice clean check. That was a good example. And they'd point these things out. So you did see both sides. But basically our conclusion was that body checking seemed to be used to intimidate, to show control, and to build a sense of power. And I would go so far as to say it was really being used as a backdrop for bullying. And I know that might seem a little bit of a stretch, but when we think about how we define bullying as this psychological or physical imbalance of power, then that's really what was going on with the body checking. So as usual, we have more questions than answers coming out of the study. But we need to think about when and how body checking and aggression are linked. It's not always the case, but there are clearly some instances of it, and we need to understand why and how that's happening. Are you fully capable of distinguishing the appropriate on-ice behaviors and off-ice behaviors? Or does this transfer, the mindset, the psyche, transfer immediately out? What will Hockey Canada's new policy mean for psychosocial development? And accompanying this rule change, I will emphasize that there was also this idea that body checking had to be taught in a systematic pedagogical approach that had to be taken to teaching body checking. So we'll see if that actually includes moral development, if that actually includes moral reasoning, or if it's just this is how you give a hit safely. And then finally, do these findings have implications for other sports? Again, looking here at hockey, what does aggression and another skill look like in another sport? So how do we assure healthy competition? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but what I will look at is one component of healthy competition. And that's really readiness for competition. When are our kids ready for competition? And again, this ties a little bit back to our first study. Well, what it really has to do with is when they can fully understand, attribute why they're being successful, why they're failing. Understanding of success and failure. Until they really understand why they're having the outcome that they're having, then it's hard to say that they should really be in a competitive environment. So what we do know is that when children are very young, then their attributions of success and failure are very much based on difficulty and ability. So if they're successful, it's because this is easy. If they're successful, it's because I'm good at this. And you hear it all the time. Or, this is too hard, or I'm no good at this. But as they move through development, and typically we say by age 12, not until by age 12, are they fully able to distinguish when success is due to difficulty, ability, effort, or luck. So it's only later, 11, 12, that they really start to understand the role that effort, I was really successful because I worked really hard. Or he was just more successful because he had more chances at it. So luck can play a role as well. So what does this mean? Some of you have probably heard about Soccer Ontario's long-term athlete development plan and scores not officially being counted and all the uproar that's associated with that. If you are interested, you can check out these links later. Festivals instead of tournaments up to age 12. So scoring is not really being introduced until up to age 12. Like I say, there's a lot of people that are getting their backs up about this. My position is that, obviously there's social comparison going on from a much earlier age, and children interpret various elements of the difficulty, the ability, the effort, and the luck throughout development. So probably age 12 is quite extreme. I have 2 sets of twins, and so I can definitely attest to the fact that I saw social comparison going on starting at 9 months of age. They started comparing what one had to the other. So 12 does seem a bit extreme, but by the same token, there are some really good things that are in this long-term athlete development plan that have been completely overlooked that feed into and support this idea of not introducing scoring until age 12. Ideas about deliberate play and skill development and keeping it close within the community. And so I think if you are interested in, I want to bring this up at the next cocktail party or on the side of the soccer pitch, then to take a look at this document, because it is a very interesting document. A quote from one of my participants in the early study: "I play T-ball." That's awesome. And do you play games? Can you tell me how it works? Well, sometimes Mr. Q lets us roll around in the dirt. Oh, you roll around the dirt when you play T-ball? Yeah. Oh, I bet your yellow shirts get really dirty. Yeah. Do you ever run around the bases? Yeah, all of them. Oh, did you get a point for that? I don't know. Are they ready for competition? I don't think so necessarily. So I'm just going to address these last 2 points together in the interest of time. How do we talk to children about tough losses, bad ref calls, and other complex sport situations? And what should we look for in a youth sport program? So these are big questions. I'm not going to do them full justice here today. But if we go back to the intro and what we look for, kids in sport laying the foundation for confidence, character, and success. I'm going to visit Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model. You may have heard of this before, but I think it highlights that the child is in the middle of many nested systems. And we need to consider all of those nested systems when we consider how to best approach children's sport. We need to consider policy, we need to consider programming, and we need to consider parenting and coaching. So first, I think, if we think about policy, we need to think about child-based policies versus professionally based policies. It floors me to this day that so many of our youth sport programming, and let's think about Bodychecking, for example, is driven by sort of an old boys club of professional sport, and that these models trickle down to be the foundation of our youth sport programs. Decisions that these guys are making are influencing what's going on at the most grassroots level. And I think that just needs to be flipped on its head. We need to start looking at youth sport from the perspective of youth sport, not from the perspective of talent identification, professional sports, etc. Another thing that we need to think about is valuing and redefining youth sport. And from a policy level, I think this is really relevant. So typically, we put our best coaches at the most elite levels. We need to flip that again on its head and start putting our best coaches at the grassroots level. And we need to redefine what we mean by best coaches, not just the ones who have the most knowledge and expertise about skill development, but the ones who understand child and youth's cognitive, psychological, and social development and can really excel in communication skills. So just to give you a sense of what I mean here, this is, some of you may be familiar with the National Coaching Certification Program here in Canada. And this is it's well recognized. We train thousands of coaches each year. It's been adopted by other countries as well. And we've got 3 key streams. We've got the community sport coach, the competition coach, and the instruction coach. And you can see sort of the descriptions of what each one is. But most of our volunteer parents are in that green element, the community sport coaches. Those are the people who are coaching our kids. There is one module in the entire NCCP program that's focused on coaching and leading effectively. And in this module, you can see some of the things that are addressed: positive image of sport, model to athletes, communication, interacting with athletes. So this sounds like a pretty good course. Now this banner here is who does this course. You can see it's the 2 other streams that are taking this course. The community-based coaches aren't supposed to take this course. This is the one that they need the most. This is the one we need. So we need to be rethinking what we value in community-based sport coaching. Again, thinking about when to introduce sport, what kind of guidelines. I don't have the answers right now. I've shared lots of insight, but again, a couple of examples that really speak to it. Sometimes soccer's not fun. I get kicked by the ball in the face. He thought it was funny. I don't go to soccer. My mom and dad are sending me to jump class. What's jump class? What are they doing at jump class? Why is she being sent to jump class? Her perception, obviously, but again, rethinking how we view an introduction to sport. When we think about programming level, sport programming, 51% of Canadian children aged 5 to 14 participate in organized sport. 7% of Canadian children are meeting recommended daily physical activity recommendations. So even though we've got half of our population engaged in organized programming, they're not even active enough. So something's wrong with our programs. We need to rethink that. And I think the best way to do that is to really focus on those deliberate play, the games, the progressions, the cooperation, and minimize the focus on deliberate practice. Coaching and parenting. This is a big one, and grandparenting. We could go on for this one for quite some time, but I think the first key is modeling appropriate behavior. And this is a quote from Teresa Beasley's, one of my graduate students, research on how we facilitate positive youth development in the school, in the classrooms, or in the school sport contexts. And here you can see this player talking about, coach has shown us that we have to wait till other people are finished talking. Then, if they have a point to say, we can say it. I think through that, he has taught us respect towards other people. Like, if someone is talking to you and you want to retaliate, you just have to respect them and let them finish before you speak. He has shown us this. He's been a model of this. So this idea that it does need to be taught and modeled deliberately. Maximize those teachable moments. Discuss the moral dilemmas and choices. Discuss the bad game when everybody shakes hands saying bad game. Explain why behaviors are inappropriate and appropriate. And then relate these sports situations to real life. How can you take this learning and apply it in real life settings? Another quote here from another volleyball player talking about how her coach really maximized those teachable moments. I'll let you read through it. Giving feedback is always a challenge. You need expert communication skills to do it effectively and to turn it into a teachable moment. Again, this focus on communication being so key. So really, policy, programming, parenting, and coaching, I think these are the changes. These are the things we need to consider moving forward. If we revisit those wonderful athletes, we can all think to those exciting times, connect with those moments of being inspired, having a sense of pride in our Canadian athletes. We are coming up to the Pan Am Games in a couple months, and I know this today was a little bit framed around that. And I think we can take some ideas if we want to take advantage of the opportunities to turn these moments into positive learning experiences. I'll skip that one because I know we're short time. If we think about a quote from John Furlong, who I know has had his name dragged through the mud and back since 2010, but if we think about him, he was the Vancouver CEO, and these were his inspirational words in those moments after the games in Vancouver 2010. He said, "Athletes of the world, by your example, you've injected hope into the lives of youth everywhere. Youth that will rise tomorrow, ready to emulate you. Boys and girls you will never meet, now know that it's possible to achieve greatness through the power of a dream. You have set the course for the next generation of great champions. You return to your homes as the best ambassadors we have for the world. You are the future. The youth of the world await your leadership and your example." This is the epitome of success. This is what everybody's striving for. We will not all achieve it. All of our children will not achieve this. But it's some of those values, some of those pieces that we want to draw upon and really hope to develop through sport. And that's what we need to continue to revisit. So I want to thank you so much for your time today. And I do have a few minutes for questions. And my contact information is there. And again, thank you for being here on this beautiful Saturday morning and sharing a little bit of knowledge with me.